Jane pushed open the door of the restaurant's bathroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor. It was a place she loved, a fancy modern space with polished tiles and elegant mirrors that stretched from wall to wall. She admired herself in the mirror every time she visited, adjusting her hair or reapplying her lipstick. It was her little ritual, a moment of self-love in a world that often felt overwhelmed. As she stepped inside, the bathroom was empty, save from the faint hum of the air conditioner. Jane made her way to the farthest stall, where she always felt a bit more private. But just as she was about to close the door behind her, a loud, sharp crack echoed through the room. The sound was startling, like a mirror shattering into pieces. Jane froze, her heart skipping a beat. She whipped her head around, scanning the bathroom for any sign of what had caused the noise. But everything seemed perfectly in place. The mirror were intact. The sink were spotless. She took a deep breath, telling herself it was nothing, just one of those strange noises buildings make. With a shrug, she went into the stall, eased herself and quickly washed her hand, eager to get back to Jack, her boyfriend, who was waiting at their table. As she left the bathroom, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt colder, and there was a strange tension in her chest. But she brushed it off as nerves. She was always a bit jumpy, especially in new places. When she returned to the table, Jack was in the middle of a story about his day at work. Jane smiled and nodded, trying to focus on his words, but her mind kept drifting back to the bathroom. She felt a slight shiver as she sat down, and then something peculiar happened. She grabbed her bottle of drink, almost unconsciously, and splashed it over on Jack's face. The cold liquid spilled across the table, soaking Jack's sleeve. Jane gasped and hurried to clean it up, apologizing profusely. Jack just laughed it off, saying it was no big deal. But Jane felt a wave of embarrassment. She never did anything like that before. She was usually so careful. She blamed it on nerves again, but deep down, something didn't sit right with her. She chalked it up for being one of those awkward moments everyone has from time to time. Little did she know, it was far from ordinary.
I see you, my heart beats, a lady of all men's dreams.
Hey guys, welcome today. Please take a moment and like this video and sit tight as we take you on a journey as why you should never admire yourself ever again on a strange mirror. Jane and Jack had been coming to this restaurant for months. It was their spot, conveniently close to both their offices. They loved the food, the cozy atmosphere, and most of all, Jane adored the bathroom. It was the kind of place where she could spend an extra minute admiring her reflection, checking out the latest outfit she had put together, or just taking a breather from a hectic day. But she had no idea that someone or something had been watching her all those times. Demi was her name, or at least it had been in life. Decades ago, before the restaurant had become the stylish E3 it was now, it had been a different kind of place. Demi had walked there, lured in by promises of quick cash and an easy life. But instead of finding fortune, she had found herself trapped in a nightmare. One night, in a dark ritualistic ceremony, she was murdered by those who owned the place back then. Her body was buried in secret, but her spirit never left. She had been bound to the mirrors, trapped in the reflection of that cursed bathroom. For years, she had lingered there, watching patrons come and go, unable to escape her fate. But then, Jane started coming. At first, Demi was simply curious. She watched as Jane entered the bathroom, admiring herself in the mirror. Her voice soft as she hummed a tune or spoke to herself. It was strange, seeing someone so alive, so full of light and warmth. Demi hadn't felt that way in so long, and slowly her curiosity turned into something more, a desperate longing. Demi wanted what Jane had. She wanted to be part of that life, to feel that warmth, to be free from the cold, dark prison she was trapped in. And the more she watched Jane, the more she became convinced that Jane was the key to her freedom. Jane and Jack had made their usual Friday plans. Dinner at the restaurant before heading home. It was their routine and Jane loved the familiarity of it. She was always eager to escape the chaos of the week and spend some quiet time with Jack. That evening, the restaurant was busy, but Jane barely noticed. She was too excited about the new dress she was wearing, a sleek red number that made her feel confident and beautiful. After their meal, Jane excused herself to the bathroom, the same one she had visited countless times. As soon as she walked in, she felt a chill. The bathroom seemed different, somehow colder, darker, even though the lights were the same. She shook off the feeling, telling herself she was just imagining things. But as she approached the mirror, she noticed something odd. There was a faint crack in the glass, right at eye level. It hadn't been there before. Jane frowned and reached out to touch it. But as soon as her fingers brushed the glass, a jolt of icy cold shot up her arm. She gasped and pulled back, staring at her reflection. For a split second, she thought she saw someone else staring back at her, a shadowy figure just behind her shoulder. But when she blinked, it was gone and she was alone again. Uneasy, Jane hurried out of the bathroom, her heart pounding. She didn't tell Jack about what she had seen. She didn't want to seem crazy, but the feeling of being watched stayed with her like a weight on her chest. That night, as they drove home, Jane couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Jack was talking about their plans for the weekend, but Jane wasn't really listening. She felt distracted, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite pin down. And then, just as they were pulling into their driveway, Jane did something strange again. She reached over and slapped Jack's hand as he went to turn off the car. It was a quick, sharp motion, and both of them were startled by it. What was that for? Jack asked, half laughing, half confused. I don't know, James stammered, her face flushing with embarrassment. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Jack shrugged it off. But Jane felt a chill run down her spine. She had never done anything like that before. It was as if her hand had moved on its own without her even thinking about it. Over the next few days, Jane started noticing more strange things happening. It was little things at first, forgetting where she had placed her keys, losing track of time, or feeling cold breeze in the house even when the windows were shut. But then the incident became more intense. One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, Jane stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair. She felt a sudden urge to stare at her reflection, almost as if she was being drawn into the glass. The longer she looked, the more distorted her reflection became. Her face twisted, her eyes darkened, and a shadow seemed to loom behind her. She blinked and everything returned to normal. But the experience left her shaking. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, very wrong. That night, as she lay in bed beside Jack, she felt the presence again. It was like someone was in the room with them watching her. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just her imagination. But then, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She gasped and turned, but there was no one there, just Jack, fast asleep beside her. The next morning, Jane was exhausted. She hadn't slept well, her dreams filled with dark figures and whispers she couldn't understand. She tried to brush it off, but the fear gnawed at her, and then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were scratches on the bathroom mirror, deep, jagged line, like someone had clawed at the glass from the inside. Terrified, Jane decided to confide in Jack. But when she tried to explain what had been happening, he looked at her with concern, clearly worried about her mental state. Jane, maybe you're just stressed, he said gently. We've been working a lot lately. Why don't we take a break? Get out of town for a bit. But Jane knew it wasn't just stress. Something was inside her house, something dark and malevolent, and it was getting stronger. As the days passed, The presence grew more powerful. Jane started hearing voices, whispers that seemed to come from mirrors in her home. They called her name, urging her to come closer to look into the glass. She began to avoid the bathroom altogether, too afraid to see what might be lurking in her reflection. But the presence followed her even into her dreams. One night, as she lay in the bed, Jane felt the cold hands again. This time, it was unmistakable. She opened her eyes and saw her own reflection standing beside the bed, staring down at her with hollow black eyes. It wasn't her. It was Demi. The spirit had finally revealed herself, taking on Jane's form in the mirror. And now, she wanted more than just reflection. She wanted Jane's life. Demi had been watching Jane for months, feeding off her energy, growing stronger with each passing day. She had chosen Jane because she was everything Demi had lost: warmth, love, and a life full of promise. But now, Demi wanted it all for herself. Where do you get to have everything? Demi hissed, her voice echoing in Jane's mind. I want it. I deserve it. And now I'm taking it. Jane felt paralyzed with fear as Demi's voice filled her head. The spirit's presence was overwhelming, like a dark cloud suffocating her. Jane tried to scream, to wake Jack, but no sound came out. It was as if Demi had taken control of her body, trapping her in her own mind. Demi leaned closer, her reflection growing darker and more distorted. Jane could see the malice in her eyes. The twisted jealousy had been festering for years. And then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, Jane realized what was happening. Demi wasn't just a spirit. She was trying to possess her. With all her strength, Jane fought back. She tried to push Demi out of her mind, to reclaim control of her own body. But Demi was relentless, her anger and desperation fueling her power. You can't have him, Demi hissed, her voice filled with venom. You can't have anything. He's mine. Your life is mine. In that moment, Jane understood. Demi was jealous of Jack, jealous of the love Jane had, of the life she lived. She had been watching him, waiting for the perfect moment to take everything away. The slap in the car, the cold hand on her shoulder, the drink spilled on Jack's face, the strange, uncharacteristic moments of anger. Those had all been Demi, trying to push Jane out of her own life. But Jane wasn't going to let her win. Summoning every ounce of willpower, Jane broke free from Demi's grasp. She forced herself to move, to sit up in bed, and finally to scream. The sound shattered the silence, waking Jack instantly. Jane, what's wrong? Jack asked, panic in his voice as he grabbed her shoulder. Jane gasped for breath, her body trembling with fear. She looked around the room, expecting to see Demi's dark figure lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing there, just Jack, looking at her with concern. I saw her, Jane whispered, her voice shaking. In the mirror, she's trying to take over. She wants to take everything from me. Jack didn't understand at first, but he could see the terror in Jane's eyes. He pulled her close, holding her as she sobbed into his chest. We'll figure this out, Jane, he whispered. We'll get help. We'll make this to stop. Despite Jack's reassurance, the haunting continued. Demi's presence grew stronger by the day, and Jane's grip on reality started to slip. She avoided mirrors at all costs, but even without looking, she could feel Demi lurking, watching her every move. Strange things began happening in the house. Objects moved on their own, doors slamming shut without warning, and the temperature in the house would drop to freezing in the blink of an eye. The once warm and loving home Jane and Jack shared became a place of fear and uncertainty. Jane started to withdraw from Jack, afraid that Demi would hurt him. She spent hours locked in the guest room, avoiding mirrors and reflections. But no matter how hard she tried to escape, Demi was always there, whispering in her ears, trying to wear her down. One night, Jane was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while Jack was still at work. She had avoided the bathroom all day, but the need to wash her hands after handling raw meat was too strong to ignore. Hesitantly, she walked towards the kitchen sink, where a small circular mirror hung on the wall above it. As she turned on the first set, she glanced up, her eyes catching the reflection, but instead of her own face staring back at her, she saw Demi's twisted grin. The spirit was standing right behind her, her eyes filled with rage and envy. Before Jane could react, the reflection lunged at her, and suddenly Jane felt a searing pain in her hand. She looked down and saw a deep cut on her palm, blood pouring from the wound, but there was no broken glass, no sharp object that could have caused it. Demi had attacked her through the mirror. Panicked, Jane wrapped her hand in a towel, trying to stop the bleeding, but no matter how tightly she pressed, the wound wouldn't close. It was as if Demi's presence was keeping it open, a constant reminder of the spirit's power over her. When Jack came home, he found Jane sitting on the kitchen floor, her hands still bleeding, her face pale with shock. He rushed to her side, but she just shook her head, unable to explain what had happened. She knew Jack wouldn't believe her if she told him the truth, that Demi was trying to kill her. "We have to get rid of mirrors," Jane whispered, her voice barely audible. "All of them. We need to get them out of this house." Jack didn't understand, but he could see the fear in Jane's eyes. He didn't argue. That night, they removed every single mirror from the house, covering the bathroom mirror with a thick blanket and storing the others in the garage. But it wasn't enough. Demi wasn't just in the mirror anymore. She was in Jane's mind, slowly taking over her thoughts, her actions, and no matter how hard Jane tried to fight, she could feel herself slipping away. As the days went on, Jane's condition worsened. She became more and more erratic, her behavior unpredictable. She would lash out at Jack for no reason, her temper flaring at the slightest provocation, and every time she looked in a reflective surface, whether it was a window, a puddle, or even a polished piece of silverware, she saw Demi's face twisted with rage. Jack knew they needed help. He reached out to a local priest, Father Michael, who had a reputation for dealing with strange occurrences. When he came to the house, he immediately sensed the presence of something dark and malevolent. "There's a spirit here," Father Michael said gravely as he walked through the house, his hand clutching a rosary. "It is strong and is deeply attached to Jane. It won't let go easily." Father Michael explained that Demi had been drawn to Jane because of her vulnerability, her warmth, and her habit of admiring herself in the mirror. The spirit had latched onto those moments, feeding off Jane's energy until she had become strong enough to try and take over. "The mirror are portal," the priest continued. "They connect our world to the other side, and this spirit had been using them to reach out to Jane. But now it is more than that. Is inside her, trying to possess her completely." Jane clung to Jack as Father Michael prepared to perform a cleansing ritual. He lit candles, sprinkled holy water around the house, and began chanting prayers in a low, steady voice. At first, nothing happened, but as Father Michael's prayer grew louder, the air in the room seemed to thicken, and the temperature dropped sharply. Jane felt a pressure in her chest, like something was trying to squeeze the life out of her. She fell to her knees, clutching her head, as Demi's voice filled her mind, screaming in rage. "I won't leave. She's mine. She's mine forever." Father Michael continued his prayer, his voice rising above Demi's scream. The house shook, the walls groaning under the weight of the spirit fury. And then, with a final piercing scream, Demi's presence began to waver. Jane felt the pressure lift, her mind clearing for the first time in weeks. She looked up and saw Demi's reflection in a nearby window, her face twisted in pain before the image faded into nothingness. The ritual ended, the candles flickering out, and the house fell silent. Father Michael was exhausted but relieved. He turned to Jane and Jack, his expression serious. "She's gone," he said softly, "but you must be careful. Spirits like Demi can linger even after they've been banished. The mirrors are still dangerous. You must remove them from your home, and never admire yourself in a mirror you do not trust. Mirrors are not just reflection, they are gateways, and some doors should never be opened." The next day, Jane and Jack removed every single mirror from their home. They replaced the bathroom mirror with a simple unreflective surface and covered any remaining reflective object. Though Jane was free from Demi's grasp, the experience left her scared. She could still feel the cold touch of the spirit on her skin, hear the whispers in the back of her mind, but most of all, she could never forget the way Demi had twisted her own reflection into something monstrous. As she stood in her now mirrorless bathroom, Jane thought back to all those times she had admired herself in the restaurant mirror, unaware of the dark presence lurking just beyond the glass. She shuddered, a chill running down her spine. From that day on, Jane never looked into a mirror the same way again. And whenever she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a window or a polished surface, she would quickly look away, afraid of what she might see staring back at her. The house was peaceful once more, but the memory of Demi's shadow lingered. Jane and Jack knew that they had come too close to losing everything, and that some things like mirrors should be treated with caution and respect. As they lay in bed that night, Jane turned to Jack, her voice trembling slightly. "Jack, promise me something," she whispered. "Anything," he replied, his voice soft and reassuring. "Promise me we'll never let a mirror into this house again." Jack nodded, his expression serious. "I promise, Jane. No more mirrors." They held each other close, their bond stronger after surviving the ordeal, but the lingering fear in their hearts was undeniable. Even though the threat seemed to have passed away, they couldn't shake the feelings that Demi's presence was still out there somewhere. Months have passed and life slowly returned to normal for Jane and Jack. The fear that had once gripped them began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of security. They no longer jumped at shadows or avoided reflective surfaces, confident that the spirit had been banished for good. But the memory of Demi never truly left them. One day, as Jane was cleaning out the garage, she came across a box she didn't recognize. Curious, she opened it and found the old mirrors they had removed from the house, wrapped in clothes and tucked away. For a moment, Jane hesitated. The fear from that time rushed back to her. But then she shook her head, reminding herself that Demi was gone, that she no longer had any power over her. Jane decided to dispose of the mirrors once and for all. She carefully carried the box outside, planning to take it to the dump the next day. As she set it down in the driveway, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the mirrors. For a split second, she thought she saw something, a shadow, a flicker of movement behind her. But when she looked again, there was nothing there, just her own face, pale but calm. Jane took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You are gone," she whispered to the reflection. "You can't hurt me anymore." And with that, she turned away, leaving the mirrors behind. But as she walked back into the house, a small nagging thought crept into her mind. What if Demi wasn't truly gone? What if she was just waiting, biding her time, searching for another mirror, another portal? That night, as Jane lay in bed, she couldn't help but glance at the darkened window, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the glass. She reached out for Jack's hand, finding comfort in his warm, steady presence. But even as she closed her eyes, a final thought echoed in her mind, a warning she would never forget. Never you ever trust a reflection that isn't your own, and never ever speak to the shadows in the mirror, for you never know who or what might be waiting on the other side. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to share this story with your family and your friend who might love to see them. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.